Hey everybody, I'm Drew Burdick. I'm a CX leader working with small, medium, and large companies in 15-year career. I'm here to chat with Andrew Duncan, who's the founder of Vertice Labs. He and I worked together for a couple of years at Slalom previously, and we're excited to talk to you today. I'm gonna let him introduce himself, but we got some fun topics to cover.
Thanks for having me, Drew. I'm excited to talk to you about this. Me and Drew had a jam session not too long ago, and we were like, we need to get on the mic to have this conversation because, like you said, we worked together and it was just gold, some of the things that we were talking about. And I think it could be helpful for people to just hear about this and have the discussion. So, like Drew said, I'm the CEO and founder of Vertice Labs. We specialize in custom software development projects and strategic technical advisory services. You can find us at verticelabs.io.
All right, our first topic is going to be digging into Agile. For those of you listening, probably heard of Agile. It's become pretty ubiquitous in the design and product and software engineering world. And when it's done right, it can be a pretty helpful tool. It can help everyone stay, marching to be the same drum, moving together. But sometimes, most of the times, it could be actually a pretty big barrier to actually solving problems. So, Duncan, love to hear your thoughts on how you've seen Agile work well, and then also how it's gotten in the way of progress in your career.
First of all, let me start by saying I love Agile. I recommend that you use Agile, but I think there is some ways that you can use it that helps your team gel, helps your team run efficiently, deliver product to market. And so, some of the ways that I have seen Agile used where it becomes an obstacle as opposed to an impetus for or catalyst for software engineering teams or non-technical teams is following the Agile process for the process's sake, right? Like I view building software as similar to like driving a car. You're often making thousands of micro decisions as you're moving through the project lifecycle, right? What to build, when to performance optimize. Some are strategic, some are technical decisions. And so I've seen the process get in the way where you need to have a meeting to talk about a thing that should just be a micro decision. And so when it becomes process heavy and it takes away from what I believe is the true reason for Agile, which is the facilitation of communication, then it can become a hindrance, right? And so you start spending most of your time in meetings, or not most, but a lot of your time in meetings, or having the wrong people in meetings, which makes them expensive. And so the teams become less focused on shipping code, product that will move the needle for the company and more focused on preparing for the next conversation. So I like, again, using the car analogy, I like to think of like holistically Agile, right? The product roadmap, the strategic roadmap that is usually set by a project owner or the executive team as like the GPS, right? And so maybe you have a long road trip planned and you've got some stops along the way for gas or food. And then the driving, the turning the wheel in the car as like the thousands of micro decisions that technical teams are making as they're building whatever product that is.
Cool. Yeah, I think in my experience, I've also seen a lot of that. There's the tendency towards focusing on dogma for dogma's sake, right? It's like the religion of Agile. So, we got to do sprint planning and grooming, and we have to do PI sessions because that's what you're supposed to do. And instead of really thinking about how are we going to ship functioning code and get it to market sooner, right? And test and learn. I think you said it right on, the process for process sake, I call it like work about work, right? You do a lot of, we got to put the stories in the backlog so that we can track the thing and have the sprint velocity measured so that stakeholders feel good about the progress. And, I think the ultimate, if you look at the manifesto of Agile and the original intent, it was more about shipping product, shipping valuable features and functionality to a customer, to a user, instead of it being, letting the powers that be know what the team is working on, right? And I think that there's something in Agile, it's almost people don't trust each other or something. Like there's this, the executive leaders want to feel like they're kind of micromanaging or controlling the process. And the reality is that tightening of the screws, that trying to control the process is actually the thing that's going to impede you from getting to the outcome, usually.
Yes, I agree. If you think about building high-performing teams, and we're going to get into the 10xer conversation here in a second, which I'm excited to talk about. But if you think about high performing teams, they often come with a high degree of autonomy. And so the job from the strategic point of view is give them some direction, give them some goals, something to focus on, and let them go execute, right? Keep frequent touch points on the progress of the project so that way you can, maybe add a new stop along the route, for the direction of the product. But for the most part, you don't want to become prescriptive. People who are passionate about building software, passionate about anything they do, design, software, fixing cars, they're passionate because they love it, right? They're motivated to do well. So really, most of the time, they just need some general direction, and they are off to the races to build what you need to build. And I love what you said about the purpose of Agile is to ship products. And so I specialize in, small to medium-sized businesses and startups. And I love that phase of the product development lifecycle because it's messy, it's chaotic. And the way that I have seen Agile used successfully is putting some organization around the chaos that is trying to build an airplane while you're flying it, right? So some things that I've seen work really well. There's different flavors of Agile. There's Kanban, there's Scrum. Some of the things that I have seen well is guiding the team into just choosing the type of Kanban Scrum process that they want to follow, and then iterating over the processes that they follow. Occasionally, this is sort of where your technical leader, the in the weeds technical leader comes in. They've got to observe this process as a whole. Every so often, you need to interject into the process something different. But the key there is to start less prescriptive and move into more of a guiding role where you're making small tweaks, similar to driving, right? Staying in the lane. So I have run teams on Kanban, I have run Scrum teams. They both work well depending on how the team wants to execute, the seniority of the team. And then, lost my thought. Cut that part out.
So I can kind of build on what you're saying. I think that the different ways of approaching Agile is important too, because there's this concept of dual track Agile, right? Where you have research and design is happening before development. And I actually think that philosophy is broken, right? Like this it's facilitating or fostering this idea of like throwing things back and forth over a wall, right? You're like, all right, the designers and researchers are going to go over here and they're going to make some stuff and then they're going to throw it over the wall. The developers are going to pick it up and they're going to build it. And in a perfect world, that would work. But the world isn't perfect, right? People are messy. The process is messy. And inevitably, you're going to encounter something where, a UX researcher is going to be digging in and identify, oh, shoot, this is a big insight that we didn't realize. But the dev train is running, right? Like they're building something. And there's no way to really like stop the train or sort of pause the train and say, hey, hold up. We're actually like charging down the wrong path. We just got this really invaluable insight. But when you have this sort of dual track, you throw it over the wall, what ends up happening is, we'll put it in the backlog. So then you build a minimum viable product that nobody really wants, right? And so I think there's this actual opportunity to think about like minimum lovable experience, right? What's the experience that people are really going to love? And you have to obviously weigh in, is it feasible? Is it viable? But the desirability piece often kind of gets like, well, that's fine. The dev train is running. We're just going to get it done and ship this thing. And Agile tends to kind of it's focusing on the output rather than the outcome, right? It's not focusing on, are we going to actually deliver something that is valuable for the user? It's more about like, did we deliver it like we said we were going to deliver it in the time frame that we said we were going to deliver it? And so I think that's another challenge of Agile is the emphasis or the overemphasis on building the thing right instead of building the right thing. And I think there's the interplay of both of those that have to be considered, and it has to be in concert. Some of the best teams I've been a part of is where designers, developers, and researchers are working together side by side, and product owners and product managers. They're all working in kind of like concert with one another. And it's not this, well, that's my job, this is your job, we'll throw it back and forth. It's a truly integrated team doing the work together and learning as they go and able to incorporate that into the work real time versus, well, we already have the next 3 sprints planned, so we're going to have to wait for 6 weeks before we actually do anything about it, right?
Yeah. Yes. I love that the minimal lovable product. I love this idea. I have this visual that about running, agile teams so most of us have seen sort of the iterative process diagram, right? This sort of highlights how agile teams run. And I agree with you. I think like sort of the dual track agile process that I think a lot of companies try to implement is broken because, to your point, they don't pivot when they need to. And so this visual that I have, if you can think of like a picture of the solar system, right? The sun being the nucleus where all the planets orbit around it, but it's not flat, right? It's not this flat disk where the planets orbit around it. It is flying through space. The sun is the nucleus, and the planets are sort of trailing the sun and moving along. And the sun in this diagram is the customer problem, the customer experience, the reason we're building this, right? To solve this problem for a customer. And so all of the processes, all of the deliverables, all of the work and energy that anyone is doing is attempting to get as close and solve the problem that is the nucleus, the customer problem. So I love this visual because it highlights sort of the track that teams, I think, should follow when they're trying to ship product, right? And so I think, one of the ways that I have seen this implemented very well, one of the ways that I've implemented this very well is you have your strategic team, your executive team, your product stakeholders, and you have your technical teams. And so you do have the track where the strategic team is inputting high-level deliverables, high-level goals, really, not deliverables, high-level goals of the product, so the general direction. And then you have your design and research team iterating at the forefront of that and then feeding into the technical team to implement. And one of the ways that I have seen this work very, very well is when you situate, in not necessarily physically, but in process, when you situate your design and research team right next to your executive team, right next to your development team. So again, the facilitation of communication happens naturally, almost like, you essentially eliminate or mitigate as much as possible the friction that it takes for these teams to talk about what they're trying to achieve. Because again, you're moving 1,000,000 miles per hour trying to ship this product because there's budgets and timelines and deadlines and customer pressure, right? So you want to be able to facilitate this communication as frictionless as possible to speed up the processes of the team.
Yeah, it's funny. So I used to work at Red Ventures probably close to 10 years ago. And Red Ventures at least at the time, this was a while ago, they were not an agile organization, but they were agile, if that makes sense. Like they were not running the sort of agile processes at the time, but they were extremely fast and good at delivering quality products and experiences quickly. And so I think one of the secret sauces, or one of the things that made us good at shipping things quickly, was each team that was focused on a particular business unit. I sat in the same cubicle or the pod with my kind of peer, the engineering leader, and our teams all sat around us, and we would constantly, every single day, because of the close proximity, we had a whiteboard right next to our desks, and we would just turn around and whiteboard stuff real time. And we shipped, this is the thing that's so funny, is like people talk about 2-week sprints, or, if you ship every sprint, that's a successful thing. We would ship every day. Like we were shipping features and functionality, new experiences, new things daily. And it wasn't unusual to launch things at the end of a day. We just, hit send and do a commit, and there it was live. And I think that a big part of why was because of the proximity. And to your point, in the world we live in today, maybe it's not always physically in person, but I think the proximity of teams, but from a process standpoint, is really important to foster an environment where people can say, hey, you know what? I just saw this thing that doesn't make any sense. Let's just quickly jam on this, figure it out, and then ship it, And I think this is especially important when you talk about like those mid-sized companies and startups, because they don't have they don't have the luxury of 100 to 1,000, engineers and designers that are working on something. They've got like 5 or 12 or right. And so you have to make sure that the thing that you're working on is really the most valuable thing for the business. And you got to be able to pivot on a dime, because if you don't, you're going to end up just wasting time and resources on stuff that doesn't really matter. You're shipping things that nobody cares about. And you're like, well, great, we just spent, 6 sprints building this thing that nobody wants to use. And now, honestly, then you've got the CEO or the executives are saying, well, I guess we're going to have to do a riff because this isn't valuable. Like we didn't get what we needed out of this, right? So I think that's part of what's
100%.
contributed to a lot of the layoffs lately is people aren't shipping quality stuff or aren't shipping stuff that really means anything. Yeah, it works, but is it valuable? Maybe not, right?
Right, 100%. Yes. You think about that, right? Like these, there's been a lot of tech layoffs, but layoffs in general, and there's economic factors that, that are at play there too, but outside of the scope of this conversation. But yes, the people who typically who don't survive these rounds of layoffs are the ones who aren't shipping, who aren't close to the bare metal of making the company better, right? These aren't needle moving efforts or initiatives, right? And so it's one of like the we'll talk about flow state in a little bit, but it's one of the best experiences when you're within a company, all the way from the engineering level, design level, individual contributor, up to the executive team, and sort of observing this process that you are the champion of, to watch a team execute at a high level quickly, because the energy is high, everyone loves it, and it's just exciting. It's fun to be a part of.
Yeah. So I think it's a good segue into our next topic, which is this concept of 10x developers, which you and I have talked about a couple of times, but this idea of, bringing on folks that can create a ton of value. I've hired X designers, you've hired 10x developers throughout our career. I'd love to hear more about, like, what are some of the ways that you've attracted, retained, and grown? What are the things you look for? What makes somebody an X designer, developer, what have you?
Yes. So first, I'll start with, so I've had this conversation a number of times. Some people don't believe it's real. Some people think employees are like cattle and you can just treat them all the same. I firmly disagree with that. I think 10Xers are real. And I think, for the most part, Xer is more of a mindset than it is like a person, right? And so there are some characteristics that I look for when I'm hiring, engineers, right? Because if I could, I'd build a whole team of 10Xers, right? But the main things that I'll look for is people who are deeply passionate about what they're doing, right? This is not a means to an end for them. This is not like, I got to pay my power bill, so I'm going to go learn to code kind of thing. They're passionate about this. And so passion shows up in a number of ways. Maybe they like side projects. Maybe they blog about this. Maybe they just talk a lot to other coworkers and they have very interesting conversations in the office, right? Passion can show up a number of ways. And so really, when you're talking to people, meeting people, you're looking for their curiosity, like a natural curiosity for the way that things work, particularly on the engineering side, right? Like they take things apart, mentally, right? And I think another thing too that has been helpful in this is that they have like sort of this general immersion in the thing that they're passionate about, right? So they find ways to immerse themselves. So maybe they go to meetups. Again, maybe they're doing hello worlds with new languages, or the big thing right now is generative AI. So maybe they're playing with some LLM technologies. And so I look for that. When I interview people, I look for where their passion lies. And it shows up in unique ways. I had a guy who I interviewed, must have been a decade ago. I interviewed him, and he was just starting his career as a software engineer. And so he didn't really have any software engineering background to talk about during the interview. But again, I wasn't looking for technical skills. I was looking for like a deep passion about technology. And so he had awesome stories about what he built in college, what he built for fun, things that he's done just outside of his, but more importantly, was not just his passion about building technology, was his passion about people as well. He had spent time in managerial positions in like fast serve restaurants, talked about stories about where he's learned some leadership skills, things like that. And so I think that's huge. Look for the passion. That has worked out very well for me, at least so far in the last 15 years. And then another big thing that I look for, and this, I think this is sort of something that everyone would expect, is low ego, right? I think a low ego to capability. We're gonna cut that. Let me try that again. Low ego to capability ratio, right? So when people can take positive feedback, constructive feedback, well, because they're interested in growth, they're interested in that feedback. And so my general philosophy is hire character, train skill. And that's not to say like you have like a React Native project that is generating revenue and you got a guy who applied and has no experience in native development, right? Or web dev even. You still want to look for people who have the experience, but for the most part, look for hire character, train skill, and look for people who are passionate.
Totally agree. I'm a big believer in that hire character, train skill. My last team at Slalom, we had this idea of like 70-30 skills. So 70% of your skills are the hard skills, right? The things that I know how to design or I know how to build or whatever, right? Those are the things that you can teach people. The 30% skills is the softer stuff. It's the human skills. It's the things that you can't really teach, right? It's kind of it comes over the course of time. Often it can be like kind of an innate character quality. And I would much prefer hire somebody who has a lot of the, or if not all of the 30% skills, and I teach them the 70%. That's easier. Much harder to bring somebody on who's like a super talented individual, but then, they don't have any of the sort of character qualities that you need. There's this book, it's really good. It's called Culture Playbook. I've read it a couple of times. There's also a longer form version called Culture Code. And it talks about this notion. There's a scientific study that was done, I don't know, sometime in the last 10, 15 years. And it talks about 3 different types of teams. There's the professional team, the all-star team, and then the culture team. And 10 out of 10 times, the culture team wins. Doesn't matter like how good the quality of the people are in terms of their talents and skills. If you have a team that's all marching together, that have got each other's backs, that are doing great work, they're going to win, right? It's why you look at like professional sports. The teams that have all the all-stars, they hardly ever win because they can't play well together, right? There's no chemistry. And when I was at a slalom, I kind of coined this, I call it core 4. So the 4 things that I looked for was high give a shit factor, growth mindset, bias towards action, and good communicator. If you've got those 4 things, you've got a job. I'll teach you the other stuff, right? And there was a lot of folks that we hired that they were like career changers, right? They had worked in other industries. They weren't a designer. They weren't a researcher. They weren't a strategist previously. They were living and working in a different environment. But we saw in them these characteristics that kind of resonated, and we said, okay, that we can teach that, right? In the next 3-6 months, we're going to focus on kind of giving them all the skills they need, hard skills they need to be able to be a great designer or consultant. And it worked. Like we had multiple folks come through that we hired because of those softer skills, and they've ended up being wonderful folks. They still are there. There's this other really cool thing in that book that I was mentioning. They have this, if you know the San Antonio Spurs, when they're going through and evaluating talent for who to bring onto the team, they have all this sort of like criteria that they look through. At the very bottom of the sheet, there's a checkbox that says not a Spur. And basically, like, you could have all the criteria in the world, but not be a Spur, right? And the same thing for the SEALs. They have like not a SEAL, and you're either a SEAL or you're not. And there's really nothing you can do about it. I mean, you just have it or you don't. And some people don't like that, right? People want to say there's this, like, oh, everybody can be anything. And you're like, I don't know, maybe. But I think in terms of how, at least in my career, how I've hired folks, the people who have the right mindset, like actually my team, I've got, Philip here. We had this thing a year or so ago. I don't know if you can read that, but it's an award for high give a shit factor. And we actually implemented this high give a shit factor award because I think it's important. If you don't have, to use a different word like grit or tenacity or passion about what you're doing, and you're not naturally curious, then it's just a job, right? You're just doing the thing. You're just executing at that point.
Yep, I could not agree more. I think I posted this on LinkedIn last week, maybe a couple weeks ago. It was the number one determining factor in whether someone will be successful, no matter what their endeavor is grit, right? Like and Mike Tyson, right? Everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face, right? Like life is tough, right? Like it's gonna hit you at 1,000,000 miles per hour, and you have to have the grit and perseverance to push through, to solve whatever the next problem is, especially as entrepreneurs, right? Because it's we all know it's really hard, right? Like most startups fail, 90% of startups fail, right? So, but I really like what you said about the 70-30. It reminded me of a story. There was a woman I hired. We were launching a new office in Atlanta, and there was a woman that we hired, or she came through the interview process, and we had a pretty robust interview process. I did her evaluation, I did her technical evaluation. We had a multi-stage process. Someone did technical, someone did like a personality behavior, and so I did her technical evaluation, and she did not have the technical skills to do the job, right? She had like entry-level technical skills. She had some, but she had done a boot camp, so she had entry-level technical skills, and the overall consensus from the interview committee was not to hire her. And I'll never forget, I fought tooth and nail because I thought she was going to come in and make a huge impact. And some of the factors that I considered were This lady was a stay-at-home mom for the previous 15 years, right? And so she was re-entering the workforce. She had gone to a boot camp to learn how to code, and that's the career she wanted to follow because her children had been off into college, right? So she now had the time. And I found through her interview that she had leadership skills. She had a poise and professionalism about her that a new office would benefit from, right? Especially as you're hiring a bunch of people pretty quickly, right? Rapidly trying to scale this office. And then not only that, she had the passion and the drive to quickly gain those technical skills. Now, she wasn't going to report directly to me, but I went out of my way and put my reputation on the line to hire her. She personally sent me a postcard, right, to thank me for the process. And a year later, she was still there. She sent me an email, checked in with me, and we hired her, right? Because, that was sort of the ultimate decision was made that we hired her, which was not my decision, but I pushed hard enough that it happened. We hired her. A year later, office was thriving. She was thriving. She was excelling. She had become one of the better employees in the office. And so that's one of my proud moments as a hiring manager, that I was able to, because you can make mistakes hiring, right? I made the right decision, and it was just sort of positive feedback, reinforcement to me that the process that I'm implementing does work when you get it right.
Yep. There's this other thing I think is interesting when you think about this concept of 10x, individual contributors. And it's, I think it's actually this idea of situational leadership. So I'm sure you've gone through like leadership training and mentorship and stuff, but as for the last, especially 10 years, I've gone through a bunch of these programs. And one, I won't name the the place that I was working, but one place I was working at, I was going through this leadership development program, and we learned about Myers-Briggs. And what was really fascinating is they provided you with kind of like, here's what your personality is, here's the personalities of your team, and then it gave you some like practical tips and tricks for how to engage with those folks. And that was like tremendously valuable for me, because up until that point, I was like, oh, this is how I manage or how I lead. And I just sort of, it was, my way or the highway. And what I discovered was some of my team members, it worked really well. I'd just kind of point in a direction and be like, go figure it out. And they loved that. Others, they were like, dude, I don't know what you want. Like, you're not being clear. You're not just sort of describing what success looks like. And so when I shifted how I showed up as a leader, it was amazing to me because it unlocked these specific folks on the team, like their whole, workload level attitude changed overnight almost, because they went from, in my opinion, I was like, this person's not a 10x designer, to like, wow, okay, I was the problem. Like, I was the one that was not kind of bringing out the best of them because I wasn't tailoring my leadership style and my language and my messaging to what they needed from me. And so I think there's also this like component of people have it or they don't. And as a leader, it's like incumbent on us to communicate in a way that draws the best out of our people and helps them kind of realize, like, now I understand what you're saying. It's like, it's almost like you're speaking a different language, you're like, you're saying stuff to them and they're like, I don't know what you want from me. I don't understand like how to be successful in this role. I don't know how to do this job because it's not really crystal clear what success looks like. And so anyway, that was a tremendous lesson learned for me, and has also helped me not only identify and hire and retain top talent, but also like coach people with, different approaches to leadership to bring the best out of them as well.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's probably one of the things that makes it so hard. It's like, you're trying to decide, does this person have it, with the lack of awareness of your own areas of growth, right? Like, you don't know what you don't know. You don't know where you need to get better because you don't have any exposure to it. So that's one of the things that makes it tough, which is, I've gone through leadership training. I've read a bunch of leadership books, and they help because they expose you to some of the things that you're not even aware exists, right? And so I have a similar story that I like to tell, and I got really lucky because must have been like 5 or 6 years ago. I got really lucky because we just built a new engineering team. We're delivering a really cool project, and it was, an AI-based decision sort of product. And I had a senior engineer on the team, and she was a rock star, right? She has a reputation for a rock star. And I'm the type of leader who I'm like, oh, let me dive in with you. We can figure this out because, I like figuring things out, right? And someone pulled me aside one day, and another leader in the company, and said to me, hey, that's not her style. She really just wants you to give her a little bit of direction and then leave her alone. And that day clicked, and I was like, oh, I got to try that. And I tried it. Like in 2 weeks, code it was flowing, it was shipping. And so I think sometimes we can trip over our own feet, just trying to figure out how to make things work. Even when we're just trying to help, right? And just because different personalities have different styles of learning, of executing, and so
Yep.
it's a catch-22 type of thing where like maybe you just don't know quite how to handle that situation, and you're the problem. It's not the employee.
Yeah. It's a good segue to our next topic, which is thinking about startups in particular. You've been a startup CTO. You've also been a consultant. You've done fractional CTO roles. Leadership is hard, and it's also hard to hire leaders, right? It's hard to find the right leaders to drive the right results, like everything we've talked about so far. I'd love your opinions on, should startups hire internally? Should they bring in fractional leadership? Should they outsource to a consultant? Like, what are your thoughts? What are the pros and cons? Like, what would you recommend?
Yeah, so this is something I've been thinking about quite a bit lately, just because I'm often having conversations with, SMBs or startups, and they're trying to decide, some of them have an engineering team in place and they're doing well. They need more firepower. Some of them have some of them are non-technical founders, and they're trying to get off the ground and decide, do I hire a CTO? Do I hire a consulting company? Or some of them have a team and it's not going well, whether it's a CTO or a consultancy. And so I've spent some time thinking about this one and talking to founders, successful founders who have exited multiple times, and founders who are just getting started. And so my general thought is, like, it's not rocket science. If you know someone, like if you personally know someone who is awesome and has delivered successfully, that's kind of a no-brainer. You hire that person if they're interested, right? And then if you know someone who knows someone, give that a shot. And then if you don't know anyone, you can always go find a recommendation somewhere. That's true whether it's you're hiring that CTO or that consultancy. Hiring is difficult, so if you want to go fast, I think you need to launch very quickly. A consultancy can help you get there because typically they can be ready to deploy a team who can execute very quickly. Some of the advice that I give is, no matter which direction you go, if you hire a CTO or a consultancy, find that leadership role, that strategic, technology leadership role first, and then stick with them for a while. Because typically when you change technology leaders, they like to bring in new technologies because they're familiar with them or they believe that they'll work better. And so my general philosophy is, we went to the moon on something less powerful than a calculator. React, Angular, Vue, Python, Node, it'll get the job done. Most of these languages can solve, the problem that you're trying to solve. So you don't need to, I think rarely does changing technology help you achieve the goal that you're trying to achieve. I think it's more of a cultural and process problem if you have a team that's struggling, right? So I would say get that leadership position first, whether you're hiring a fractional CTO or some strategic leadership advice from a consulting company or that CTO. Get that role first. Choose your technology and get a plan in place. And then I think one of the really important things, and then keep that person around for a while, right? Like, especially, if you're a startup, especially until you start generating some revenue. If you're a larger company running a new initiative, until you get it launched, get some customer feedback, and have a team gelled and in place and executing. I think it's really important to, when you hire, whether it's the CTO in-house, even if it's the person that you know, or it's the consulting you've never heard of, it's really important to integrate them into your team and your process. And what I mean by that is, from the founder to the CEO of a, $50 million company, you should have very regular checkpoints with your CTO, right? And so if you're just starting the project, at a minimum every 2 weeks, talking about how the project's going, what are people working on, getting feedback on any problems that you're experiencing. If you are later in the stage of the project, maybe it's once a month, because people can get busy, but I would say at a minimum once a month. And then the next thing is, while you're having these touch points with your technical leader, you should always also have, if it's not you, someone that you designate who's not a part of the technical team, using whatever is being built, right? So oftentimes when you're building a product for the first time, you have a test environment. If the team, whether it's internal or a consulting company, tells you that a feature is done, if you or your designee cannot touch it, play with it, fill it, it's not done, right? You need to touch it. You need that quick feedback to make sure that it's actually done. And what this gives you when you're using, when you're leading a project, it gives you the ability to get quicker feedback of the health of the project. I've talked to a lot of founders where and successful businesses where projects haven't gone well and they don't find out until 6 months down the road and they spent $300,000, right? And so that's not the world that anyone wants to live in, especially if you don't have a lot of money to burn before you fail, right? As a startup, those often touch points and that quick feedback loop, one, gives you the ability to manage the project, but two, it facilitates communication both ways, right? Not just you making sure it's going well, but you also being able to say sort of what we were talking about earlier about the dual track Agile. It gives you the ability to bring in feedback to the team about the direction of the company and what those goals are, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I think my response to should I hire, should I outsource, is kind of it depends, right? It depends on the stage of maturity that you are in. It depends on your strategy, right? Like how are you thinking about, your business? Are you trying to do rapid growth? Are you trying to slow roll it? Do you have investors? Are you bootstrapping it? I think a lot of those factors kind of layer into the decision of whether one way is right or the other. I've seen both work well. So just to give a quick story, there was a client that I worked with a couple of years ago. They wanted to really quickly design, build, launch a new mobile app, and they didn't have any kind of design capability in-house, like zero. So effectively, me and my team operated as their design team for the beginning, right, to get the thing off the ground and get it launched. And then I myself helped with the writing job descriptions, defining the operating model, and then essentially interviewing and hiring a design leader to replace essentially me. And then I kind of stayed along with that person as they hired their team, and then we naturally transitioned it over. And now they've been running for several years, independent. And that situation, the reason why that worked was because this particular client, they just wanted to get something out the door quickly, and they couldn't afford to take the time to find the right, leader. Plus, they didn't really know design. So there's this bit of we don't really know what we're even looking for, like what a good candidate looks like. And so that's where they engaged me and my team to come in. We'll show you how to do it, right? We'll show, not tell, teach you how to fish, all the, cliches.
Yeah.
And then help them go find the people that kind of match up with that and bring them into the room. I've also seen it where, especially with larger organizations, there's so much politicking and culture stuff that has to happen that if you bring in outside parties, it's just not going to stick, right? The culture, it's like an organ rejection. You put in a new kidney and the body says, no, I don't want this kidney. It doesn't work, right? And that also happens. And so you have to kind of know your organization, understand how quickly you're trying to get it to market. Can you afford to wait? Do you need to get it out sooner? I think the biggest lever for whether you should bring in outside parties is if you don't have any capability internally to even identify the right talent, and if you're trying to do something fast, probably outside party is a good path. If you're a larger organization and you've got a lot of established, structure and governance and teams and people, you probably want at least a person internally to be the anchor, and then have maybe that person work with an outside vendor to get the thing done. So anyway, I think a long way of saying it kind of depends. I've seen them work, in a lot of different scenarios. I think for startups, the biggest decision they have to decide is how fast is fast enough. And then, that'll help probably drive your decision, is my opinion.
Yeah. And I think also, one of the things to consider, right? Like if you do, even if you do have that internal team already and you have a strategic leader, but you're interested in, understanding, are there improvements and efficiencies to be made? You can bring in someone strategic, to help, an outside person, outside vendor to help, give you some of that feedback. I had a client one time tell me, we're hiring you because no one, they had the internal politic and sort of a lot of loss of trust internally. And so people won't listen to us, right? They won't listen to the strategic leader. They won't listen to the, IC, the individual contributor. And so they brought someone in to basically sell the same message, right? That because the leader internally already knew, right? They were intelligent. They had experience in this area. They knew, but because of the culture, they brought someone in to help sell the message. And part of that work was to one, sell the message, but in selling the message, help start changing the culture internally so that way it became a more high trust environment, more communication, so they could execute, again, once once we left. So
yeah. I think the one other thing I'll add is sometimes you need an expert or a specialist, right, to kind of augment the capability that you already have. So for example, you may not need a CTO or a fractional CTO, but you might need somebody who's extremely deep in understanding a particular technology or a strategy approach, whatever you want to call it. And so that's another world where you might even take a hybrid approach. You might say, we're going to hire an in-house CTO or have a technical co-founder or whatever, but we really need to like beef up our chops on this. Like, we don't know anything about AWS, but we're going to go AWS for whatever reason. We're going to bring in an outside party to help us with that, to either like teach us and show us how to do it or kind of augment us or add, capability to what we already have. So I think that's another variable too, is you could think about like, what expertise do you already have and what expertise do you lack? And then use that to drive the conversation or the decision. This is a really awesome conversation. I really enjoyed talking to you, man. I want to give people an opportunity to look you up, find you online. Where can folks follow you?
yeah, you can find me at verticelabs.io or email me at duncan@verticelabs.io. We specialize in custom software engineering projects, helping a lot of what we talked about here today, helping out with hiring, team topology, what skill sets you need, and then, building out your software engineering or technical team processes and culture. So feel free to reach out.
I'm kind of the yin to Duncan's yang. I do a lot of the customer experience, upfront research strategy, design stuff that goes into making sure you build the right thing in addition to building the thing right. You can find me, drewburdick.com. I've got a weekly newsletter. I'm putting out content. We do more of these types of videos. So stay tuned and appreciate you guys listening in. Thanks, Duncan.
Have a good one.
All right.
Thanks, man.